What is going to happen to the many Indigenous and place-based communities that need to relocate because of climate change? I'm Barrett Bistroff, a lawyer, planner, mediator, and researcher with my own business based out of Alaska and Louisiana, and today I'm going to talk about one of those communities, Newtok Village, Alaska, a federally recognized tribe. I started working with them when I was completing my PhD on how Alaska Native villages are adapting to climate change and other challenges, and what political and legal factors impede adaptation and relocation. I feel a little goofy recording this presentation early. I would prefer that Romy Caliente, the relocation coordinator for Newtok Village, would be giving this live. But for simplicity's sake, I'm recording this, and hopefully Romy will join me for questions. Newtok is situated on an inlet of the sea in southwestern Alaska. Climate change has melted the permafrost that stabilized the bank and increased the severity of storms, so the village is literally crumbling into the sea. The State of Alaska Hazard Mitigation Plan uses the Yupik Eskimo word for the phenomenon of melting permafrost and erosion, Ustek. If you're curious, you can go on Google Map and see the boundaries of the village and compare them to the aerial photo. The erosion rate is variable since it's episodic, driven by storms, but it's going fast. In 2007, the Army Corps estimated that the whole community would be underwater by the end of 2027 actually, and it seems on track to do this. The houses in this picture are no longer right there. They were bought out and demolished through FEMA's hazard mitigation program, so people were able to move just before a storm came that destroyed the underlying land. There are a lot of existing challenges in Newtok that are exacerbated by Ustek and flooding and black mold. There has never been running water in any of the homes here, nor are there any roads into or within the village, although cell phones can work. The washateria, where people can take showers and wash their clothes, has been broken for a long time. It may still be broken. The generator providing electricity has been spotty for a long time, and the community often loses power. The landfill has already eroded away, and people are collecting their trash and putting it in bags, but there's no good place to put those trash bags. Likewise, the sewage lagoon is no longer intact. If you can imagine, people are already having to use the bathroom in a bucket in their house, and they're carrying this bucket along a muddy boardwalk to the river to dispose of it. But this place has a rich culture that people are intent on keeping. When I walk down the boardwalks, I hear kids speaking their own language. People don't want to just move to a city. Out here, they're able to continue doing their traditional hunting and fishing, and they're better able to exercise tribal sovereignty. While Alaska tribes don't control their land, they do have sovereignty over members, which allows them to have tribal courts and exclude alcohol from the community. The community has been planning to move for decades. They had selected a site 9 miles away called Mertarvik or Mertarvik, not saying it right, either way. The site is an island, but it is the only high ground for many miles. The local village corporation that owns the land under Newtok got an act of Congress to trade corporation land for the National Wildlife Refuge land located at Mertarvik. This is the cover of a report with a very general idea for moving done back in 2011 by consultants. There was enough outside government funding to pay for planning, but not enough for an actual move, and little insight as to how to get this funding. Then there were problems with money management by former leadership. The tribe elected a new council, but they ended up having to get a lawyer, Michael Wallery, to get the Bureau of Indian Affairs to recognize the leadership change and stop giving funding to the previous government. Mike has been a visionary in the relocation process. With the help of Alaska's congressional delegation, the Denali Commission, which is a federal agency that works uniquely on Alaska rural development, received $15 million on behalf of Newtok to start making the actual move happen. The Alaska Native Tribal Health Consortium, which specializes in water and sewer development, was charged with managing the money. Denali Commission also funded a relocation coordinator, Romy Caliente, who has been critical to carrying out all the little details of relocating. The Denali Commission money ran out after the 2019 construction season, which resulted in about 80% of the infrastructure the village needed in terms of utilities, but only a handful of houses, which is the community's highest priority. The tribal leadership has been navigating difficult questions about who gets to move first and when, what are the obligations of people living in the new houses, and where will funding come from to get the rest of the people over to the new village. I mentioned the Denali Commission as the main source of money so far, but there are also other sources. Since Denali Commission money is flexible, the village has been leveraging it as a source of matching funds for projects that require matching funds. In general, agencies seem much less willing to provide money for housing than infrastructure, so this is a challenge. It's particularly challenging given the housing crisis in rural Alaska. It often takes $500,000 to build a house in remote places with no road access, and these houses may not even have running water. You have villages in southwest Alaska with 15 people living in them, where each family is occupying one bedroom. There's little in the way of income in most villages, and people are depending on housing authorities to construct houses. But especially for villages in need of relocation, there's no way the housing authority can keep up with the demand. You can imagine all this overcrowding, along with the lack of sanitation in Newtok, adds to the risk of spreading COVID-19. The village was able to use CARES Act funding this year to construct COVID-19 isolation units at the new site, Mertarvik. We've also been lucky to have good grant writers and grant administrators who can navigate the complicated means of getting assistance from the Federal Emergency Management Agency before and after disasters. By the way, FEMA and the Stafford Act don't consider USTEC a disaster. We've had a helpful engineer who's willing to work on a lump sum basis. That is Patrick LeMay. Most recently, he's gotten Newtok funding to build gravel pads on which the houses will stand and funding to finish the new water system at Mertarvik. He's also been working on a grant to buy out the remaining houses in Newtok. The buyout money won't be enough to pay for a new house at Mertarvik, but it can be a match for a grant or a down payment for a mortgage. In addition to the people I mentioned earlier, we have on board Addison Spafford, who's helpful with transportation and other grants, and Jeff Wilson, who's helpful with getting housing grants from the U.S. Housing and Urban Development. We're also fortunate to have good accounting support provided by Stephanie Dalrymple at Yukon Accounting. I'm mentioning all these people by name because I think having a good team that can work together is critical. Rather than work with one big firm on the relocation, the council individually hired an expert in each field. This saved a lot of overhead and forced some very different people to work together. So the council gets diverse expertise and is avoiding the cost of a big consulting company with its own agenda and lots of overhead. Obviously, the consultants are a small part of the overall move. Mainly, I mention them in the context of getting grants. The residents themselves are a critical part of the move. Patrick LeMay has hired many young people and trained them to do construction. We developed a housing policy that requires residents who did get houses in Mertarvik to make payments for them based on a percentage of their income. We're counting on this money to serve as a match for grants to get houses to move the rest of the Newtok residents over to the extent we can't get other funding. The housing policy was very difficult to draft and maybe difficult to implement. We've already amended it a few times and will likely continue to amend it as new situations come up that we didn't foresee. I'm not sure about the future of many Indigenous communities in climate-vulnerable locations, but I think Mertarvik is going to make it. Ideally, all the houses could be done by 2022, 5 years ahead of the predicted date when all of Newtok is slated to go underwater. With that, we're ready for some questions.